Yeah, and welcome to another video. I'm Brett Papa, and today I got a free course for you down in the description box below. It is a link to a free soloing course called Fretboard Command. We're gonna do, how to spot chord tones, how to solo over progressions, what to do if you don't know the key you're playing in, how to play around chord shapes. We got bending, vibrato, mixing major and minor. There's I don't know. I just kind of threw everything into a course, and it gives you the steps 1 through 5 out of say 20. So that is a course that's totally free for you down in the description box below. Make sure you check it out. And then also don't forget to subscribe, click the bell to be notified when the new videos come out. And just a heads up, always check in the description box below, because oftentimes there are links to brettpapa.com, free stuff, or if we're doing collaborative videos, there's also the other people's social media stuff down below, and also gear stuff. Everybody always asks me what I'm using, so down below I've listed a bunch of the gear, and I'm starting to every video also put in what gear I used in the video. So check that out. Hope you enjoy the course. Thanks for checking it out. Yeah, and welcome to Fretboard Command, the 3 keys to melodic soloing. I'm Brett Papa, and in today's little mini series, we are going to talk about what you really need to know in order to take your playing from maybe just knowing some scales, really to how to develop, create, and really own how to play melodically on guitar. And what I mean by that is with a couple of, or 3, shall we say, really easily applied methods, you're really going to be able to take maybe what you already know if you're already soloing and apply it in a new way. Or if you're starting off kind of, where do I begin in soloing? This will definitely get you on the right track from the beginning. All right, so sorry for my moody lighting. It's like, shh, we're doing secretive video training. I redone my whole studio here, and I haven't dialed in the lighting at night. So anyways, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start by, since a lot of us already know scales per se, like maybe our guitar teacher or the internet or YouTube or magazines or whatever has shown you how to play a pentatonic scale. And without a doubt, that's like the scale that's used 90% of the time in music, right? So probably 95% of the time in music. So let's start from there. We'll start from the premise that we know, how to tell if our song is in a major or minor key. Typically major is happy, minor is maybe sad sounding, right? Like this would be a major progression. Watch. So we got. Right? And maybe minor is like. Right? So let's start by learning what do we play over those progressions? If we're in a minor, progression, what scale do we use? Like, what can we use as a default scale, pentatonic wise? And the same with major. Now, what we're gonna do that's different, rather than me just teaching you a scale, which in reality is really just a guide, right? If you have a map, it's the streets, and all the different ways you can get somewhere, but it's not a destination. The destination really is learning how to see chords all over the neck. Now, if you've heard of target notes or chord tone soloing, or any of these kind of phrases that are the buzzwords of the day, what that's implying is you really know what notes you can play over any chord in your chord progression at any given time. And there's a very simple way to do that effectively. What you need to be able to do is you need to be able to take your chords in the progression, and you need to know a couple variances of those chords. And what I mean by that is we're gonna learn 3 different shapes or ways that you can play a chord, right? So if I took an A chord, for example, and I'll do A major, right? I can play this A chord. which is known as an A-shaped A chord. Look at that shape, it looks like an A chord, right? Now, sticking with this shape, I can do an A chord shape of a D chord, right? So think of this shape. If I took these 3 fingers and kept this shape, right? Now, what I would have to do is keep in mind that this chord, this A chord, has a root note on the A string. But if I took this finger right here and used it as kind of like a movable capo, but kept the same spacing, right? And I wanted a D chord, but with an A shape, I would take this finger and go on the A string, again, because the root is on, the root of our chord, the 1 note, right, would be on the A string. So I would find a D on that string, right? So the D is on our root A string for our shape here. And then this shape would be like the A chord here, right? But now it's a D chord with an A shape. Okay? Now I can do that with 2 other shapes, right? So there's an A chord with an A shape. But I can also do an A chord with an E shape. So think of an E major chord. Same thing applies, right? The root of this E major chord shape is the low E string, right? So I could do the exact same thing. I could fret a note with my movable capo finger here. Say I wanted to go and do an E-shaped chord, but an actual spelling of an A chord. So I would take this finger, find an A note, and then I would make that E shape behind my movable capo, and now I have an A chord, but with an E shape. Right? So that gives us 2 versions of that one A chord. A chord A shape, A chord E shape, and then we're gonna do a D shape. So think of a D chord. Now the cool thing about the shape I just showed you, the E shape, the E and the D shapes are always gonna be connected. They're always gonna be right next to each other, and you're really gonna see this in blues guitar. You're really gonna understand, oh my gosh, these are why these guys are playing these exact licks. And you're really gonna understand why the Stevie Ray Vaughan licks, why he does what he does, and all these different, really awesome note choices he gets in a small area. You're gonna understand why that works. And a lot of it is because of these E and D shapes of the chords he's using in his progressions, right? So check this out. So, A chord, E shape. Now, if I think about my D chord, the root of that chord is on the D string. So if I found an A note on the D string, and then keep in mind the spacing, see how there's the open D string, say that's a fretted note. Well, there's a fret in between these 2, right? So you gotta keep in mind the spacing of the chord. So here's my A root, and then I'm gonna make that D shape behind that, okay? So now I have a D shape that spells an A chord, or the other way around, an A chord with a D shape. Okay, now in this really lies the secret to melodic soloing, because if I could do that, say I knew that we were in like major pentatonic or minor pentatonic, right? So we're in A major chord progression, and I know I can use A major pentatonic. Well, that just gets me through the A chord, right? And it gives me an idea of what I could play over a specific chord progression, but it doesn't necessarily help me hit the target notes of the other chords in our progression, right? So maybe we know a scale shape that works over the chord progression, but we don't really know how to use it correctly and to our advantage so that we can create melodies and really accentuate the notes of the chords that are being played in our progression, but use one, familiar scale shape, right? And so if I took this A chord and say I'm just gonna take that same chord progression, right, that I showed you a minute ago, A, F sharp minor, D, and E. And say I knew that A major pentatonic worked over that. Now, if you don't know the pentatonic shapes, I'm gonna give you some diagrams that go over the pentatonic shapes in all 5 positions. And I'll give you this in A major so you are familiar, just in case you're not, with all 5 shapes. You really should know all 5 shapes of the pentatonic positions, right? So, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take position number 1, which is this one. You're probably all familiar with this. Now, if we knew that was the shape, how in the heck are we gonna make music over that chord progression that's gonna work, that's gonna sound like what we're playing isn't just noodling, like, and just playing a bunch of gobbledygook. We wanna make a melody that follows and goes with our chords that we're playing over, right? So if I took this shape, the first thing you want to do, right, and this is going to take some homework on your part, but we're going to use a specific example right now, is how can I find the right notes of that progression to play for every one of those chords that's going by? Well, the answer is to look in this position 1 of A major, and can we find the chords, right? All of those chords, can we find basic examples of the chords that I showed you, of those 3 shapes? Can we find those in that spot? And the answer is absolutely we can. The A chord, the A shape, is right there in position 1, right? As is the F sharp minor chord. Check this out. Still right in that same spot. Now, our next chord, you're gonna see something really cool, right? So we have a D chord. Now, what you may or may not have noticed is this note is not in our pentatonic scale, okay? But it is in our chord. So we can use that, and that is a legit note. As a matter of fact, that is the root or the D note of that D chord, right? So of course that note is gonna work. So what's gonna happen is when you can see these chord shapes all over the neck inside your pentatonic positions, you're gonna learn the modes without, even if you don't know what the mode is called, you're gonna learn how to play the modes because now you're concentrating on the chords themselves, okay? And those are gonna give you all the notes of the modes and all that other stuff. Maybe you don't know what it's called, but I know that on that D chord, I can use this, and this note is in there, right? So that is a legit lick because I'm playing. I just played a lick that hit every one of those D chord tones, right? Right? So that's how you start to do it. You start to be able to see those chords inside your scale shapes. Now, what about that E? Okay, well, this chord has one of those notes as well, right? That note right here is not in our pentatonic scale, but it's totally legit because it's part of the E chord. These two are, right? Now, if we had a D and you think about, oh, wait a minute. D and E are just a whole step apart, right? Here's a D chord. Here's an E chord. Here's a D. So that must mean if I move this shape right here up a whole step, or if I did the whole shape, right? Now suddenly I have another E chord inside that position 1, okay? So when we play, right? I've just accentuated some of those notes of that A chord. F sharp minor, right? Right, I played these 2 notes of that F sharp minor chord. Right, totally hammered notes of that D chord. I played this note here, which is the D note. And this is the 5th of the chord, right? All these chords, these basic chord shapes I just showed you are all made up of 3 notes, a root, A third, that's what makes the chord major or minor, and then the fifth. So the third, an easy way to think about it is think of an A shape, right? Chord, an A major chord. Now the only difference between this chord and an A minor chord is this B string note, and it's moved down. So that's the only difference between these two chords, and that note is the third. So it's the same here, like in a D. And then E major, E minor, right? So that's good to know too. Within those shapes, how do you modify from major to minor, right? Because that's gonna help you here in a little bit. But going back, so we hit A chord tones. Right, I'm still using my scale shape, but I'm actually playing notes in an A chord. Now when I go to the F sharp minor, this note actually works too, because I have an F sharp minor up here. But we'll get to that in a second. D. Right, so you see how that makes a melody, right? It's using that scale shape, so it gave me a framework, right, to play out of, and some other notes to choose from, because if I just played the notes of an A chord and I just stuck to these three notes, that would get boring really quick. But this gives me, knowing that I have that scale shape, right, position 1 of A major pentatonic, it gives me a lot of notes to choose from, right? But if I know in the back of my mind, okay, I have this framework I can play out of, but here's the notes that really matter over this particular chord, then I can design any kind of lick I want. That lick totally works over an A major chord, because when I bend this note, I'm bending into the third of this shape. When I hit that note, that's part of this shape too. So I bent to the third of my A chord. That's the fifth of my A chord. Back to my root. And I use my scale as some other notes to play around with, okay? Now, it's the same thing over that F sharp minor chord. Right, I can bend into that. Remember, because this is my E shape. Remember what I said, hammer this into your brain. Anytime you see this big E chord shape, right? This F sharp minor chord is an E-shaped F sharp minor chord. Know that right next door is that D shape. Always think about that. Anytime you see this chord, this finger is the start of that other shape. So in reality, there's my F sharp minor chord in position 2. Okay? It's the same thing, like, it doesn't have to just work. This is the magic. And what I'm going to show you in lesson 2 is if you don't even know, what key you're in, and just being able to play off of the chord shapes themselves, like when you hear jazz guys, and they got these crazy chord progressions, like how on earth are they doing that? Because here's the thing, sometimes when you're playing, it doesn't stick to one key, right? So you gotta be able to see your chords all over the neck so you can play off of the chords themselves and maybe what shapes are underneath your fingers. Each chord that you play, each one of these shapes I showed you, has a shape around it that you can play from. So even if you don't know the key, or if it changes keys or not, you can play off the chord shapes themselves and effectively solo melodically anyways, okay? So back to this. So we got right, bending, bent, so Remember I said we had that D shape? Right, so that's just position 1, right? Say you knew position 2, and the goal would be to go through these chord progressions and go through each one of your 5 pentatonic shapes, and can you find that chord progression in that shape, right? So if I looked at position 2 of major pentatonic, which is then can I find that same chord progression in there? And the answer is yes, absolutely you can. Here's our 1 chord. Okay? Then remember I said if we played this F sharp in the example before, so there's that root note, so that means I got an F sharp right here. What about a D? Yeah, we got a D chord right here. Cool thing about this, in position 2, the shape is this. But now, look at this D chord, or D notes right there. So you got okay, now, so that's the A chord is in there. F sharp minor chord. D. And then remember we got, okay, so you can do this D shape. It's a little bit out of position 2, but you also have this E shape here. So this part right here is awesome, right? So the chord shape goes like this. Or the scale shape, I should say, sorry. Right, so here we go, A. Right, so again, E shape of our A chord, D shape of our F sharp minor chord, A shape of our D chord, and then we have this D shape of our E chord, or this note coming from the A shape. Right, so if we move it up to position 3, which looks like this. Okay, so there is 2 versions of A we can play. You can play these 3 notes right here from the A chord, or here, the D shape. Again, E, D, right next door, okay? So then the F sharp minor, we have a little piece of it here, right? And a little piece of it here. Okay? So, and then here. Okay? So we got A. D, we can do the here, right? There's a note from it. We could go. And then our E chord is right here. So that's totally in there too. Okay, so again, A, F sharp minor, D, E. Position 4, check this out. Okay, so again, that position 3 and that position 4, they share that kind of D shape. Now, if you really want to go deep, right, there is a whole system called the cage system. On my website, brettpapa.com, I have a whole course on the cage system, which gives you five, not 3, but 5 versions of each chord. Talk about knowing the fretboard, it's crazy how much that has worked for me. Like, that was the key for me, is learning the cage system. But these 3 chord shapes I'm showing you right now really were like the Cliff Note guides to doing this. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is in position 3, it's really kind of the D shape based off of this shape, right, of that A chord. In position 4, it's that same little cluster on the higher strings, but now it's the C shape, right? But you can still think about this, right? Because there's a C shape of those chords. Think about that. There's that root. The root of our C is on the A string too. So A, and then if I make that C chord shape, I got to compensate for those open strings in a C chord, so it would look more like this. Okay? But just think about this D chord cluster, okay? That's where you really want to start thinking about that from. Right? And combined with position 4 of our pentatonic shape, there's our 1 chord. Now we have an F sharp note right here, so we can play the A minor version of our F sharp minor chord. We have our E shape of our D chord. And then we have here or here to do our E chord, okay? So again, D shape A minor shape of our F sharp minor chord, E shape of our D chord, and then we can go to the A shape of the E and play the back side, or this big E shape here. Okay, and okay, so this is just basic examples of how to do that in major pentatonic, right? And so it works the exact same way in minor pentatonic. Let's take the A minor pentatonic scale and do a chord progression, maybe like a kind of a Hendrixy sounding thing, where I'm gonna take A minor, G, F, G. So the same thing. Now, and when you're in minor pentatonic and say our home base is A minor, that chord, underneath this E shape is pentatonic position 1. Okay? So we want to do the same thing. Okay, so here's position 1. Are those chords all in this shape? And the answer is yes. Here's our A minor chord with an E shape. Okay, now if we look at this chord, remember E and D, so there's that note from our D shape. So yeah, there's a G right here. This chord's down a whole step, right? The next chord. So if I take this G shape, D chord, or I said that backwards. It gets really confusing to say this. This is a G chord with a D shape. A whole step down from there would be F. And back. So we have right, so let's do a little chord progression action here. Here we go. Ready? so let's find our chord shapes first. Okay, so we got always great to do that. Now, let's get like a little lick. Okay, so when I was going through that, right, it's a basic chord progression, super fun chord progression, by the way. But, you know, over that A minor chord, root, third, bending up to the fifth. Right, that would be the G chord. Or it could be then I have the F and then back to the right. Now when I went here and hit that, right, that's part of that F chord. You don't have to move around very much, right? So shape 2, right? We got the A chord right there, D shape. Then we have a G chord right here, or here. All right, so we got that we can play with. So we got here, or that now. The F chord we have here, right? So, and then back to here. Now you don't have to hit every note of every chord over the chord progression, right? Sometimes one note will work over all of the chords, right? Maybe you're hitting a different degree. It's not a root or a third or a fifth. Maybe you're hitting a seventh, right? Or a different note of the scale. Sometimes one note works great over everything. Right, I'm just chilling on one note. Right, let's move up to position 4. So, got my A minor chord right here, A shape. Got notes in my G chord right here. And my F right here. All right, so we got Now this is very basic mellow phrasing, but I mean, at a gig, that works, right? I mean, it wasn't like, oh my God, you're Jimi Hendrix or Eddie Van Halen or whatever. That's not the point. The point is you're learning how to take a shape or a map, right? And you're learning how to find the destination, right? Which is the chord tones of the progression, right? The notes of the chords as they're going by. You're learning how to hit those notes and to make melodies out of them. Now, you know, a lot of times you want to create a theme, right? And you want to repeat something to get kind of a melody going and then modify one or two notes in order to fit that to your progression. So let's just see if we can do something super basic. Right, we got, there's that. There's that there. We got our, and then, right? So let's just see if we can create something on the fly with 3 notes and just change it around to modify for the chords. So maybe I can do here too. In my mind, just looking at that, I can, just play off of those couple of notes, right? Maybe 4 notes. Or maybe, you know. Write a theme. So I'm playing something that's kind of familiar, repeating, going back and forth. And that's really the key, right? Is learning how to slow down. If you're already a good player, right? And you just found this video, and you're like, yeah, I need to learn, you know, I got technique, now I need to learn melody. Slow down. Number one, you gotta slow down and realize you're going backwards, but moving forwards at the same time. You're going backwards in like technique and shred and ego, but you're like quantum leaping forward as a player. So maybe you can slow down, and a way to keep that exciting is to really work on your bending and vibrato and all that kind of stuff, which we'll go over later. Your timing, right? The different variances you could do, adding chromatic stuff. We're gonna go over all of this kind of stuff, but to keep it exciting for more intermediate level players, slow down enough to really target those chord tones and then see if you can take your licks that you already know. You know, maybe you're great at playing songs but not creating melodies. Well, see if you can take some of those familiar licks that you've learned and modify them so they can fit over that chord progression. Maybe you know how to play minor pentatonic blues and you've memorized how to play over a 1-4-5, but you're tired of sounding like Stevie Ray Vaughan and want to sound like you, right? So the key to doing that is modify those licks, right? You've learned how some of the things work, but now you know how to get out of that particular lick safely and effectively, or change the notes so the notes sound like you, right? Because Stevie Ray Vaughan, you know, comes from Hendrix and you know, Freddie King and Albert King and all the Kings, right? Really, in reality, he took all those players and turned it into something that was him, even though a lot of them are the same licks. But if you heard him do it, right? Or you heard Albert King do it, if you heard Albert King do it, oh, that's Albert King. You heard Hendrix do it, oh, that's, you know, Hendrix. You heard Stevie Ray, oh, that's Stevie Ray. Could be the same lick, but it's how they play it. The vibrato, the feel, the timing. It could be this lick. That's been played 1,000 times by every great blues player, but you can tell who's playing it by how they play it, right? And so that's the key, right? Not to just copy, you want to take what you've learned from other great players and then modify it and make it your own. That's what everybody does. And if you spend and slow down, and if you're a beginner player, it's even better, and you start to hear, okay, over this A minor, here's what a third sounds like. That's what the root sounds like. That's what the fifth sounds like. Okay, cool. Now, can I, play over this chord and right? I'm just taking those notes and I'm modifying them. I'm modifying the way I play them, right? I heard that chord progression in my head, so I was really playing to that chord progression, right? And you could hear that chord progression going on in the notes I chose, right? You could hear A minor, G, F, right? Or maybe you couldn't, but like as you go further along in your playing, you will start to hear that. So what I would suggest to you in the beginning is, maybe take those two chord progressions I showed you, the major one, and play major pentatonic over the A, F sharp minor, D and E chord progression. And the key would be is if you have like an iPhone or something like that, go to the voice memo or whatever, whatever phone you have and record slowly that progression, right? Maybe it's that fast. Then find those chord positions, take one pentatonic position at a time and find that through the E, A, and D chord shapes. Find that progression in each one of your pentatonic shapes, right? And then spend a day on each shape, how to manipulate those notes in that one shape to bend to your chord progression, right? Look to the scale beyond what you're playing and so you know what notes you can bend into, right? If you know how to play that chord progression here and here, you're effectively going to learn how to bend into some of those notes. Like when I bend this, that works over that chord. It also works over this, right? So you can learn how to bend into those notes too, like maybe when that. Right, so take one shape, maybe just hammer in those chord tones, use the scale shape itself to kind of lead into chord tones, get out of the chord, and then also when you get that one shape down, go to the next shape. When you get that shape down, then work on those two together, okay? And then that'll start giving you some area to play with on the fretboard. So the whole recap of today's lesson is make sure you learn how to play the A, the E, and the D chord shapes of every chord in your progression. And then learn what key you're in. Pick a key, a song with a clear A minor chord progression or A major chord progression. Make a little jam on your phone and then start playing to that chord progression. The key is to play to something, right? So you can start to develop your ear so you can hear the band playing, right? Because that's the whole nother thing, right? You got to start to learn how to see these chord shapes, but then you got to actually learn how to listen and play at the same time so that you can play the right notes at the right time. It's all about everything together, learning to hear and create at the same time. All right, so that wraps it up for lesson number 1. Let's get into lesson number 2. All right, so there you have it. Lesson 1, it's a 4-part series. Make sure to check it out in the description box below. If you like that video and other stuff like that, make sure to support the cause at brettpapa.com. That is also in the links down below. You get a membership. It's all 700 of the videos that I have. You get them just all right there, just bam, at one time delivered to you. Plus, you get a discount on the other collaborative courses I do. And then I'm not saying there is or there isn't, but there might be couple of awesome courses from somebody really awesome in the membership in there too. So I'm just saying you might want to check it out. All right, thanks so much for joining me once again. Make sure to subscribe, click the bell to be notified when the newest videos come out. We'll catch you next time.